I'm not one for being religious. However, there's this verse in the Bible that says, "But when Jesus saw it, he was much displeased, and said unto them, Suffer the children come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of God." And he's kind of going off on this because he's seeing some children who need to essentially be protected and saved. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about a novel called Suffer the Children, which is apocalyptic horror novel that tells an immense story about grief and everything. Let me break it down for you. So the way today is going to work is I'm going to tell you all about who we are and what we do. We're the Decomposing Flower podcast, and we kind of talk about anything true crime related or anything interesting that we kind of find. And for me, I really want to talk about the story of this novel because it just really stuck with me. And we recently covered the 100 Days of Sodom, and it just really inspired me to continue talking a little bit about these books that I read. I'm your host, Kira, and with me is Jen. I'm going to give you the intro like I am right now. Then we get into what the story is all about, and then I'm going to talk about just a deep dive into the entire book. So let's begin. In a quiet, middle-class suburb in this place in Michigan. It's a bustling holiday season. There's the smell of fire and snow and everything to do with Christmas cheer. And you kind of feel that energy of excitement in the air as people are trying to get their last minute shopping in. And honestly, it's kind of a stressful time in people's lives going through the holidays. There's a couple of people whose lives are about to change, particularly one named Joan Cooper, who is a stay-at-home mom. She runs an informal daycare out of her home to supplement her income. She spends her days managing the chaos of local toddlers and children and trying to balance this chaos with discipline and creative distraction. Her husband, Doug Cooper, works as a sanitation worker, and all throughout his week, he wonders if he's going to still have a job. It is really scary, especially for them, trying to maintain the stay-at-home lifestyle for Joan and taking care of their two children, because Doug recently learned that there's a new automated garbage truck that threatens to take away his job and turn everything obsolete, which is very prevalent to what we are right now with AI and everything stealing people's jobs. So understandably, he's a bit frustrated, detached, and kind of distant from his family. But together they raise two children, Nate, who is a very curious young boy, and Megan, their young daughter, who still believes in monsters. Among the children in Joan's daycare is Josh, the young son of Ramona Fox. And Ramona is a single mother working as a human resources manager. She struggles to maintain her busy, demanding life with all the responsibilities of trying to raise a child by herself. And not only a child, but a ill child, as Josh suffers from severe celiac disease, condition that will leave him needing to go to the hospital. And he's extremely sensitive over different kinds of foods, which makes Ramona isolate from everyone, the local social scene and the dating scene, because she doesn't want to bring any of that into her house. She is so stressed out and has no outlet. Oftentimes, she's very defensive and comes off very harsh, particularly one day when she goes to pick up Josh and finds out that he had a reaction, and now she has to take off the day of work. and she's going to lose out on pay, and that Joan just doesn't understand because she has a husband who take care of her, and she doesn't understand how on earth that she's meant to survive another day, and they just get into this huge argument. And later on, it's discovered that he just ate some edible Play-Doh that the kids were trying to make that day. And Ramona feels immensely bad about yelling at Joan, who has been her friend for years and taking care of Josh. And kind of Josh's only friends live with Joan. So she doesn't want to take that away. However, she threatened to take Josh out of the day home, and she intends to. But where all this chaos is happening, there's another corner in Lansdowne where there's a Dr. David Harris, who's a local pediatrician, and he lives with his wife, Nadine, a registered nurse. Together, they operate a private medical practice, but their professional life is marred by a deep, unhealed trauma. Many years earlier, their infant son, Paul, was killed in a tragic car accident that left David with a physical disability, as he has to use a cane to get around. While David desperately wishes that he could move forward and build a future with Nadine, she remains frozen, stuck to the memory of her dead child. And this is really important for today's book. Through their practice, David treats a lady named Shannon, who is a pregnant teenager, and she is so excited about having the birth of her first baby. And she gets Dr. David to take a look at her baby and listen to the heartbeat. Even though he's a pediatrician, it doesn't really work with pregnant women. He still tries to give it his best and says, "Yep, she's doing really healthy." And Shannon says, "She?" He says, "Well, maybe it's a she." But while all this is going on, David and Nadine are dining with friends when all of a sudden a sudden breaking news report interrupts their dinner. An unexplained rapid medical disaster is striking down children in California. Within minutes, the phenomenon arrives in Michigan, and hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of children are dropping dead without a word. They're just dead. Doug Cooper is with his children at an ice skating rink when chaos erupts around him. Screams slowly start to build up. There's one child who just trips and falls, and his parents come over. Oh, that's so weird. They're so careless. And then another, followed them by another. And then all of a sudden, all the children are dropping. Doug runs over to try to grab his children when Nathan all of a sudden just dies. And he's there with his daughter trying to comfort her when all of a sudden she says, "I don't feel so good." And the last thing Doug remembers is his son complaining about the smelling burnt toast. And he died. And all of a sudden, Doug is left there with his dead children in both his arms. This great illness was dubbed as Harold Syndrome, or the Harold Event, after King Harold the Great, who ordered the massacre of the innocents, who only ever targeted young children. Within hours, every single prepubescent child across the globe drops dead. There's no warning, no signs that this illness was infecting them, and there's no cure. And all of a sudden, across the world, not only are these children dead, but pregnant women, including Shannon, realized their unborn babies suddenly stopped moving, and they were dead before they could even be born. The immediate aftermath is the complete paralysis of society, because the mortality rate among the young is it's an infrastructure of the entire society. Hospitals and morgues are instantly overwhelmed. Doctors are called from everywhere to come and study, to try to make a cure, to try to solve death itself. In Lansdowne, the sanitational department is conscripted to dig mass graves and arm-marked trenches. Grieving parents, including Ramona and the Coopers, are forced to watch their children get picked up in these dumpsters and laid to rest in these mass communal graves. The psychological weight triggers a wave of adult suicides worldwide, as parents would rather choose death over living another day without their child. 72 hours after the initial collapse, a global phenomenon occurs that resembles a miracle. As there's this ceremony and everyone has these candles out and they're mourning the loss of their children in the trenches and in the dark rooms of the morgue, all of a sudden, these dead children stir. They claw their way out of the dirt and walk their way back towards their homes, saying, "Where's my mama? Papa, are you there?" Ramona Fox, who was finding temporary comfort in the support of her friend Ross, is shocked when her son, Josh, who died so suddenly, he suddenly walks into the room and asks why she's kissing another man. However, this joy is quickly overshadowed by the physical horror of what is occurring. The children are moving and talking. However, they do not breathe. They have no pulse, and their skin remains pale and cold. They carry the unmistakable signs of decomposition. It's been 3 days. They smell of rotting meat. They're completely listless, staring at their parents with vacant glass eyes. They refuse to eat normal food and water and remain unresponsive. They'll be eating dinner, and then all of a sudden, boom, they drop dead again. And these parents are forced to watch their children die until it is Ramona is listening to her son talk. And he's in that kind of state where he's in that paralysis. He says, "Mommy, I'm so hungry. Feed me blood." At home, Joan Cooper accidentally cuts her finger while preparing a meal. Her children, Nate and Megan, react with this sense of urgency, licking the blood from her wound, sucking on her finger so hard it feels like it's about to break. The response is instantaneous and dramatic. The children's skin warms and their eyes sparkle with life. They begin to breathe and skip around like normal, happy children before the Herald event. They don't even remember dying. Dr. David Harris, who is examining the children, notes that the syndrome mimics death, but doesn't actually destroy the body tissue immediately. Nadine, who is driven by her maternal instinct and desperation to save these children, much like she couldn't save her own son Paul, begins to organize these blood donations among local parents in order to keep the children reanimated. However, it's all too soon that the scientific reality of Herald syndrome is discovered. Human blood merely acts as a fuel source, just for a little bit. The children's bodies don't produce nor regenerate it. A single pint of blood buys the child only 1 hour of normal, conscious life. Once that blood is metabolized, the child falls back into what they call the sleep, continuing the dying process, growing cold, and resuming decomposition. As the first months progress, the domestic pressure cooker eventually cracks. Sustaining a single child requires a continuous supply of fresh human blood, and it must be human. An adult can only safely donate a single pint every 56 days. The math makes survival impossible, especially for families who just act alone. No parent is willing to let their child slip back into the sleep. Initially, the community maintains civilized standards, parents drawing their own blood, suffering severe anemia, exhaustion, and wasting away. Their own veins are becoming depleted, and they'll beg anyone, friends, relatives, neighbors, for donations. Anyone who doesn't have children. If you don't have children, how can you possibly understand how these people are feeling? You have blood? Surely you must be able to donate some. However, the voluntary supply of blood is rapidly exhausted After all, people still need these in the hospitals. People are still getting heart surgeries. People are still trying to move on with life. But society fractures quickly as these people are trying to get the medicine, it's called. The wealthy can buy blood from the desperate. However, those without children quickly become prey as everything devolves into an individualistic struggle for survival. Grieving parents and local authorities target Ben, the undertaker, who performed cremations while the town believed that children were believed to be dead. Furious that their children were cremated and will not be able to be resurrected, they arrest Ben and drain his blood as retribution, placing David Harris, who performed surgery and autopsies on these children, in a very compromised position. Joan, who's going shopping with her children, witnesses a horrifying scene at the grocery store. While desperate parents violently assault one another over basic supplies, they see a woman who's walking with their child, and there's no sign of rot on this child. And one mother who only says she has one more hour with her kid. Can she just spare some blood? It looks like she has some blood. Surely, she's so wealthy, she must be able just to spare a pint. And that's when she says, "No, I don't have anything. There's barely any blood for my 3 sons." And that's when the other mother grabs a soup can and bashes her brains in. Following a severe injury, unrelated to this, Doug Cooper is placed in an ambulance. Rather than transporting him to a hospital to save his life, the paramedics in the ambulance start draining his remaining blood, choosing to use his body as a resource to keep their own children alive. By day 40, the town is split into two distinct parts. One who recognize the horror of their actions and are preparing to let their children go, and those who are willing to do anything to keep their children alive. Ramona Fox, who is desperate to keep her son alive, she continues to see her friend Ross, and he's so sad to see her go through all this, seeing her drain her own blood just for another hour to keep her son alive. But he won't donate any blood. Ramona loses her mind at this. She lures Ross into her home with the promise of mac and cheese, and perhaps what else sounds like mac and cheese, and restrains him, forcibly drains him, and tears apart his body. Finding success in this method, Ramona quickly transitions into being a serial killer, systematically inviting men, friends, anyone who answers the phone really, to come to her house, and she'll lure them in using whatever means necessary. Mac and cheese, money, only just to take all their blood. It's not so, perhaps, it's very obvious that she's trying to do this, and her friends eventually realize her pattern and stop answering her calls because they know she's trying to hunt them down. Doug Cooper, who is driven by this macho man, I must protect my family, and him just ignoring his job and trying to live another hour with his children, just one more hour, continues to do violent blood heists. Particularly, there's this one at the medical facility where the heist fails miserably. Doug is rescued but severely weakened, leading to his betrayal by the medical transport team who drains him of his blood. Meanwhile, Dr. Harris has been captured and imprisoned by corrupt police officers who have established a forced blood farming operation, keeping childless citizens in cages and forcing them to drain their blood in order to keep the children of the town's elite and law enforcement alive. The most grotesque horror of the Herald event is also that the pregnant teenager, Shannon, Her unborn fetus, having died in the womb during the initial event, reanimates, and while trapped in her body, the fetus requires blood to sustain itself, feeding directly on Shannon's organs and blood supply until it literally sucks her dry from the inside out, leaving her dead. But this isn't the only thing that is tragic about this entire story. As the children continue to die and be reanimated and die and be reanimated, it's kind of similar to having a stroke. See, there's a parasite inside their brain. Everyone has this parasite they've figured out, but it's only in the children that it particularly activates. And it's sort of like having a stroke. The host will die, and the parasite knows that these parents will do anything in order to feed it. So they'll give it blood, and it'll bring the host back to life. Each time a child runs out of blood and enters the sleep, like I said, it's like a massive stroke. It destroys neural pathways and loses cognitive abilities. They lose their memories. With each reanimation, they'll lose more and more of themselves, their personalities, everything that made them them, and their basic empathy. Nate Cooper, one of the oldest children of the Cooper family, struggles to hold on to his sense of identity, remembering to draw pictures of what his parents look like. Eventually, the children lose their sense of self entirely, banding together to form feral gangs that roam the streets looking for blood. Nate, possessing tragic clarity in his final lucid moments, helps his mother, Joan, understand the horrifying truth that the Herald event was never a disease or a divine miracle. It was just an evolved parasite that intended to exploit them and survive off of the unconditional love that parents have, forcing parents to drain themselves, harvest others, in order to keep the cycle going. Joan Cooper realizes that the children that she loved are gone, replaced by these parasitic shells. She pleads with Doug to stop feeding, to just let them sleep. But Doug refuses and is completely consumed by denial. These are still his children, even though they're banging down the door, even though they're ripping off pieces of his ear, even though they're breaking the house apart trying to eat their parents. They're still his kids. They're still in there. In the final few moments, the parasite enters its final stage. The children undergo a complete physical metamorphosis, turning completely predatory and vampire-like, entirely controlled by the parasite. They turn on whatever parents are left, slaughtering them, draining their blood, and soon the entire adult population of the town is gone. The novel ends in desolation. Children, the gangs of children fighting each other, trying to just get one more morsel of blood. The remaining settlements have massive walls and guards 24/7 in order to protect them from their children. But like all zombie books or movies, it's not too long before the children are able to sneak back in and continue the suffering. So, under normal circumstances, the love of parents is the ultimate force that will ensure the survival of the species. Look at a mama bear. You get in between her and her cubs, you're gonna die. It's the same thing with humans. However, like I said, the parasite knows that in order to conquer humanity, rather than physical warfare, just use what our biological instincts are forced to do, that the parents will act as a predator and a provider. Just showing how easy love can be inverted from a force of absolute and goodness and everything that we know and love to be good. It's so good to love, right? But in that, it can create evil where every horrific act you can imagine is committed in the name of love and protection. That's kind of where the book is getting at. It's a social critique that, especially in the Western world, there's this individualism where families live in these isolated bubbles, completely isolated by their own private, economic, and emotional spheres. There's no collective effort to ration blood or establish distribution systems or work together to find a solution. Instead, the community immediately goes into this highly competitive and predatory way. The novel is discussing that, everything is built off of resources, and eventually resources will become scarce. Then it's only a matter of time until everything breaks down. It is the war of all against all. The rich buy the blood, the poor sell their bodies, the childless are hunted as cattle, and the state transforms into a predatory system designed to harvest the weak in order to feed the children of the powerful. I think that's so prevalent, especially in the time that we are right now. We just had someone become a trillionaire, and there's still people who are suffering, people who are still on the streets starving, people who will die tonight because they can't eat. The novel talks about the two forms of grief: the sudden and collective trauma, and the long term grief. Before the apocalypse, David and Nadine are already living in this post catastrophe state after the loss of their son, leaving one of them physically frozen and unable to continue. When the event occurs, she views it as the resurrection of not only not only children, but of her divine purpose to protect children. She goes at it with a religious fever, seeing it as an opportunity to redeem her past failure and reclaim her maternal identity. That kind of brings us into another theme of the book, which is the danger of clinging to the past. Nadine's inability to let go of her grief, even though she doesn't have a child, leaves her susceptible to the parasite's trap. While Joan Cooper eventually recognizes the rot must go through in order to keep her children alive, she chooses to let go. However, Doug still chooses to continue, which leads us into the climax of the novel, which is truly brutal. And I'm not telling you about it. It's it's a really good book. If you ever get the chance to give it a read, please do. But just know it's gonna leave you in a mood, okay? That healthy grief requires acceptance and letting go. You always hear, "Oh, fuck, oh, time heals all wounds." No, it doesn't. But being able to accept it and continue. Unfortunately, there's always the need to continue. To demand the physical return of the dead is something that is unnatural and will lead to destruction. So, thank you for listening to this review of the tale of Suffer the Children, where we have these vampire zombie children who are vehicles in order to explore grief and, ultimately kind of the system of capitalism a little bit, but just like individualism. And, at the end of the day, if you have a child or, going through your own struggles, what would you do in order to keep someone alive? Would you become a monster? How long could you keep going until you eventually became a monster? There's no real answer for this. And that humanity's greatest vulnerability is love. And that's where we're at with today's case story. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope I have covered it with as much empathy and carefulness that I can. Once again, definitely go give it a read if you can, but just know it is a very heavy book, and there's, essay and things like that, but I won't get into that. Yeah, thank you so much, and let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.